Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Molly Blau-Gillis, and I'm Chief Communications Officer at General Catalyst. We're so glad you're here for the fourth session of our Conversation Catalyst speaker series, featuring unique perspectives, insight, and leadership from GC, our portfolio, our community, and beyond on topics that are core to our mission of investing in powerful, positive change that endures. In today's conversation, GC's Chairman and Managing Director, Ken Chenault, is joined by a panel of leaders in our portfolio and beyond who are working to build innovative, enduring companies, making an impact through workforce transformation. Today's session is the final Conversation Catalyst of the spring. We'll resume the series in the fall with a new set of discussions. More information on upcoming sessions, as well as other news and updates, can be found on our social media channels. A few housekeeping items before we get started. As a reminder, this session is being recorded. Closed captioning as well as a live transcript are available for those who are interested. If you have any questions at any time, please drop them into the Q&A and we'll try and address them during the session. If anything should happen with the Zoom session, please immediately log back into the session and we'll proceed. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our panel, starting with GC's own Chairman and Managing Director, Ken Chenault. Ken focuses on investing in fast-growing companies that have the potential to become large fundamental institutions. He also provides invaluable guidance to portfolio companies, particularly to those with an eye with global markets and responsible innovation as they scale their teams and products. Prior to joining GC, Ken was chairman and CEO of American Express. He's also the co-founder of 110, a coalition of leading executives coming together to upskill, hire, and advance 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years into family-sustaining jobs. Our moderator today is Professor Youngmi Moon. Youngmi is the Donald K. David Professor of Business at Harvard Business School, where her research sits at the intersection of strategy, branding, innovation, and culture, with a particular focus on youth and the digital economy. Youngmi is the author of Different, Escaping the Competitive Herd. She hosts a podcast for HBS called After Hours, and she also serves on the board of directors of MasterCard, Unilever, Sweetgreen, and GC-backed Warby Parker and Multiverse. Sophie Rudduck is the VP and General Manager of Multiverse North America. Multiverse is a tech startup on a mission to create a diverse group of future leaders through an alternative to university and corporate training. Multiverse works with over 500 businesses, helping them embrace digital transformation, close skills gaps, and develop a diverse talent pipeline through apprenticeships. Prior to joining Multiverse, Sophie was an early pioneer of impact investment at Social Finance, bringing together business, investors, and the government to generate meaningful social change and capital returns. Last but not least, Porter Braswell is a co-founder and executive chairman of Jopwell, an HR tech platform that helps diverse students and professionals unlock opportunities for career advancement. Under Porter's leadership, Jopwell has formed partnerships with more than 400 of America's leading companies and has facilitated tens of thousands of connections between the Jopwell community members and its clients. He is the host of the Harvard Business Review podcast, Race at Work with Porter Braswell, where he explores how to talk about race at work with senior executives, influencers, and academics. He's also the author of Let Them See You, a collection of his advice and mentorship for diverse careerists from college students to mid-level professionals. Youngmi, I'll hand it off to you to kick off today's discussion. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Molly. Listen, I can't imagine a more topical conversation for us to be having today. I think one of the things that we have become enormously sensitized to, particularly in the last couple of years, is the preciousness of our workforce, but also the instability and even fragility of our human resources. And as a result, I think companies are more aware than ever that their ability to thrive and even survive today depends on their ability to attract, develop, and retain talent. And yet our current system for developing, attracting, and retaining talent appears to be not just insufficient and imperfect, but downright broken in many respects. So let me start here. What specifically do you see as being broken in that system, and who is getting left behind and why? Ken, can we start with you?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with you, Youngmi. The system is fundamentally broken. And let me just talk in a few areas, and I think all of us, I think we'll be able to contribute to this. I think number one, the system really doesn't provide opportunity to a full range of people. That's a fundamental problem. It's not set up to, in fact, identify, attract a vast range of people into our workforce. And we have some standards and requirements that don't make sense from an outcome standpoint. So let me just talk about one of the organizations I'm involved with, 110, which is focused on finding and creating 1 million jobs for Black Americans in 10 years. For corporations, close to 80% of the jobs of 60,000 and above family-sustaining jobs require a 4-year college degree. That effectively closes out 76% of Black Americans. Now, if we look at outcomes of jobs, the reality is that skills-based is what's important. Do people have the requisite skills for the job versus an artificial requirement that they have a 4-year college degree? And what I want to be very clear about, skills first, frankly, means that you're going to have a more productive person in the job. People who have a skills first training are 5 times more likely to perform well than someone who just has an educational credential. So I think the first broad point would be for everybody, everybody, we need to move to a skills first approach. And we need to make sure that we have alignment between the outcomes that we want to generate and the requirements to enter the workforce. And we need to ensure that we get maximum participation from every segment of our society.
Thank you, Ken. I couldn't agree with you more. On the one hand, I think the pandemic introduced to us the language of essential workers. And yet, while paying enormous lip service to what you refer to as family sustaining jobs, at the same time, we have not created a level playing field. And there are these institutional hurdles that feel more artificial than ever, these hurdles to achievement. And so, Sophie, let me turn to you. Are you seeing this similar dynamic?
I would just say one thing, Youngmi, because I do think it's important when we talk about structural impediments and we talk about systemic racism, the reality is when we have structures that prevent important segments in our society. But the important point that I'd also want to make is that every person, no matter what group they are part of, they are negatively impacted by the structural situation that we have for jobs in America. Sophie.
Yes. So when I think about what is broken about the system when it comes to developing, hiring, and retaining talent, I do see this fetishization of a college degree to be one of the biggest blockers for creating a more equitable workforce, but also creating a workforce that actually has the right skills that we need for the future of work. So if you look to the jobs of 2030, actually 85% of the jobs that will exist then don't yet exist today. Yet the biggest determinant of what college you get into and how much you make is still more likely to be driven by your household income growing up than anything else. And so, at a time where individuals are choosing to go to work instead of choosing to go to college, by relying on this sort of piece of paper as a proxy for sort of skills and and future outcomes, actually we're perpetuating future generations to actually not participate in the fastest growing and highest paying jobs because they won't have a degree. And so there needs to be other ways of training individuals and also accessing these great careers. And, you know, I think a lot about, you know, what does someone get as we move to a skills first approach? And actually, when you think about even what happens in college, the single shot of learning at the start of your career, rather than skills that are delivered and training that is delivered in the workforce that really focuses on sort of practical real world experience, actually like that starts to perpetuate the problem as well, because businesses are going through sort of two big challenges today. One is, as a result of the trillions of dollars that have been invested in new technologies, how do we ensure that our workforce has the right skills? And college isn't delivering on that. And how do we build a more equitable workforce? And as Ken mentioned, you know, degree requirements are screening out, you know, 3/4 of Black Americans, almost 80% of Hispanic Americans. And we actually even see college making racial equity worse, with Black and African-American college graduates owing on average $25,000 more in student debt than their white counterparts. And so unless we start to look for alternatives and genuine alternatives that change who gets to access great careers by really looking at potential, skills, and future success, and then create the environment for those individuals to thrive through supportive environments that focus on outcomes, skills, mindset, and behaviors rather than that piece of paper, we'll end up perpetuating those same structural challenges that we've continued to see.
Yeah. You know, by the way, both you and Ken have thrown out a couple of statistics that we didn't dwell on, but are actually quite stunning to think about. So I'm glad this is being recorded, because if you go back and listen to those statistics and really unpack what those numbers, how they translate in a human sense, it's really quite shocking. And to your point, Sophie, if you look at the trends among admissions at four-year colleges and universities, what you see is that those trends are not improving those dimensions, and in fact are locking in those structural inequities that you describe. Porter, what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, so I'll take it more from the mid to senior level retention challenge that corporations are facing. And you have to put it in context. So if you go back to the summer of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, everybody got caught flat-footed. Global employees everywhere were demanding from their employers, what are you going to do about it? And then $50 billion was committed to doing something. But the real reason why they were committing to doing something, particularly around social justice issues, I think if you really unravel it, it's because they wanted to retain their global diverse workforce as employees were ready to revolt and get up and walk out. Then in the midst of that, you had COVID. So the physical connection, seeing people, the water cooler conversations were not happening. The trust, the relationships were being developed over Zoom. So flash forward to where we are 2 years later, we're sitting here and corporations are going through layoffs, and they better now retain their talent, especially their diverse talent. And they don't know how to do that because there is this lack of authenticity. Diverse individuals feel like they're not seen, feel like they're not being heard. And most importantly, they do not see themselves reflected in the senior leadership. So it's easy to take 10 or 20% more money and go to your competitor, because it's not awkward to leave your current company because you don't have those relationships. You didn't start in person necessarily, and all those other variables where you feel like you're not valued at a company. So you spent, going back to 2014, tens of billions of dollars on recruiting a more diverse workforce, and here you are now with the leaky bucket problem. And what I find to be striking is that it's the connectivity and the real relationships that ultimately will plug this leaky bucket challenge. If people feel like they are ingrained in the culture at that company and they feel like they can succeed, then people will be more willing to stick it out and stay there because they see what the opportunity can become. And I think a lot of times corporations get in their own way when building those authentic relationships. And a lot of the work that I am now going to start focusing on is going to be squarely centered around the retention challenge, as it's something that nobody has taken a swing at. Now, also part of the dynamic at play is that when you think about those that are capable of solving this problem, less than 1% of VC dollars went to Black folks, less than 3% went to women. So if you're not funding us to go out and actually build the solutions for this problem, then who's getting the funding to go out and build those solutions? So there's a whole ecosystem here that is all tied together. And that's what I'm excited to start tackling.
Porter, there's so many sub-themes in what you just said. Let me just pick up a couple of them that really stood out for me. One was the lack of conviction that corporations seem to be approaching this problem. You describe a scenario where there have been a few incidents in the past few years that have created some urgency among corporations to do things at a cosmetic level. And so they are trying to improve their diversity statistics, for example. But because the commitment has not been deeply embedded, you get a very superficial approach to diversity in those organizations. I think one of the most egregious examples that, in fact, one of the participants have pointed out is the Wells Fargo recently admitted conducting fake interviews for women and people of color to check the box on some of the diversity requirements they put in place. I mean, just some truly egregious behavior. But even among more better intentioned companies, you see a moderate degree of commitment, but not enough to create the kind of embedded solutions that we're looking for. If there are two levels of this problem, one is attracting the right people with the right skills, and then the second is retaining those folks. Let's start with the first one, attracting people based on a skill set that we believe should not just be a proxy for a degree, but in many cases superior to a college degree. When you guys refer to skills, what kinds of skills precisely are you talking about? And how can you help the participants on this call think about those skills relative to a college degree, a four-year college degree? What's different about a skills-based approach to developing talent compared to what a college or university might provide? Sophie, you want to jump in here?
I'm happy to kick us off. And I think one of the things that I think a lot about is also when we're partnering across corporate America with CEOs, CTOs, and we're really focusing with them on what are the skills that you need both today and for the future. A lot of the time, the answer is actually the talent doesn't yet exist. And an example of that was talking with a large technology company last week, where they said that they could hire every single computer science graduate in the country and still have thousands of open heads. And so a big thing that we work with our partners on is actually on first finding incredible high potential talent with a focus on the skills, in particular, the durable skills that are proxies for future success, such as grit, conscientiousness, interpersonal skills, teamwork, and really focusing on identifying for that potential. And then, when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, building a diverse workforce and creating access to these opportunities is really just the first step. And then, Porter, to your point earlier, how do you give these individuals everything that they need to not only succeed, but to really thrive in these workforces? And so our big focus is then on how we can build what we call T-shaped individuals. Individuals that have deep subject specialism in certain areas, be that in coding or in data or in digital marketing, but also continue to build those durable skills and that social capital that will ultimately drive sustained and career growth. And what we see with the individuals that we work with is when you focus on both the hard skills, which is often the focus of sort of the skills conversation, but also those durable skills, you see the outcomes, and you see that in the form of promotions and pay rises, where, you know, of the individuals that we work with, over 70% of them are getting promotions and pay rises at the end of their programs, which are paid and free to the individual. But you also see that in the form of retention, where over 90% are still in their companies 2 years on. And the reason why I think that's important is it's completely changing the way that companies have historically hired, where they look at, you know, where did you go to college, what your GPA was, and instead really reframing that conversation to what do we need today, but also how do we build for the future. And we often talk about the fact that there is a sightline problem rather than a pipeline problem. And so really focusing on finding these individuals that these organizations aren't otherwise reaching, and then giving them all the tools that they need to be successful in partnership.
You know,
So
one thing I think, you know, in addressing this, it's important that we think about this in a multi-layered way. There's the leadership issue of how we think about senior management in a company relative to the representation, the engagement. And then clearly we're looking at large segments of our population that are not on a pathway from a career mobility standpoint and an earnings capacity standpoint. If I go back and go up 100,000 feet, Young Me, to your question, if we think about days and weeks after the murder of George Floyd, people were saying and asking me, for example, what did I think was going to be different? And one of the things, frankly, I said was that my concern was that the reaction wouldn't be different, that people would throw money at the problem, they would talk about it, but then my concern was a year later, what was going to happen. Now, I think on the positive side, there are a number of companies that are trying to make a difference, but they need to understand the how part of how can they make a difference. And I think first and foremost, from a company standpoint, you clearly need ownership from the CEO, but companies need to institutionalize the importance of diversity. Now, what do I mean by that? One is, are people actually rewarded in their compensation for progress on diversity? Because if it is such a critical need of business, you know, I've often say to people, I can't imagine any company tolerating the following response from their senior leadership. We've been working so hard to sell our product. We've been doing so many things, but we just haven't sold anything. But I deserve a high rating because I tried. That's not enough. And so there has to be built-in accountability so that it can be institutionalized. And where it has been, I think you see progress continuing. But I think that level of accountability has to be there. And then I think second, from a skills first standpoint, to Sophie's point, I think one of the things that is important is part of what we're trying to do, and I'm glad GC is an investor and I've been involved with Multiverse, is the impact, and you're on the board, the impact that technology can have if directed in the right way to solve some of the problems. And I think what is important from a skills first standpoint is, one, what it requires companies to do is to have a greater focus on outcomes, real outcomes, and then say, okay, what are some of the skills and attributes? And one of the things that Sophie mentioned, when we talk about grit, people being conscientious, how do you use some of those qualitative and quantitative assessments to bring in a greater group of people? Second is, if you have outcomes, then you can identify, here are the skills I need to achieve those outcomes. And so clearly we see opportunities in technology, we see opportunities in sales, We see opportunities in people becoming truck drivers. That's a family sustaining job. Now that's different from saying in the leadership of a company, let's say the top 200 leaders, what are the pathways that we are creating? And so I think one point that I want to make very, very clear, what we're not saying is that college isn't any good. What we are saying is, even for college graduates, there's got to be more of a skills first perspective that employers have, and that there has to be a commitment to opening up opportunities, and there has to be a level of accountability that is institutionalized in the organization.
You know, I'll jump in with two quick things here. The first thing is, in terms of, to piggyback on Ken, when he was talking about, well, how do you do this? And it has to be institutionalized. As you think about quarterly or annual surveys with your employees, to make sure it gets institutionalized around it's everybody's job for diversity, the tangible things that lead to more diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultures are when people are more empathetic, when they invite other perspectives into the conversations. So when you ask the question, people need to have the tangible answers of, when did you show empathy? When did you welcome a different perspective into the conversation? And you can ask several different types of questions so that individuals will have to be conscious of the actions that they're taking, which lead to more inclusive cultures. And that's one easy, simple way to start to institutionalize. It's not just the diversity division's job, it's everybody's job. And then a real life example of, you know, the topic around skills, the way I think about it is, how do companies value transferable skills? The talent has always existed. And in my story, after graduating from college, I started working at Goldman Sachs, and I was there for 3 years, buying and selling currencies on a really competitive desk, where I was on the sales side, interacting and engaging with incredible individuals, institutions, and governments. I remember my second year wanting to break into this thing called technology. I applied for entry-level jobs, entry-level sales jobs at Dropbox, Box, Uber. I could rattle off 3 or 4 others. And while I got through the first interview, I never made it to the on-sites because I didn't work at one of their competitors. So they instantly dinged me, and they didn't value the transferable skills that I was acquiring as a salesperson working in really competitive markets, because they didn't recognize that would translate or transfer over into a basic level tech sales job. And so I had to go build my own tech company, thankfully, as a result. And so the craziness is that this talent has always existed. People with the abilities to do the job that are diverse have always existed. The problem is companies have become incredibly lazy with identifying what does it actually mean to succeed in this capacity. It's almost like they do things intentionally to keep people who are diverse out, and they can keep hiring people who look like them. And this constant vicious cycle. And so moving to a skills-based hiring or valuing transferable skills will be the only way to increase representation within corporate America.
Yeah, I love the emphasis that all of you are putting on the notion of accountability is going much deeper than, again, this cosmetic level of just diversity. In other words, if you think about cosmetic diversity as being sort of the first step, there are multiple outcomes that go much deeper than that, including the extent to which people feel included and valued, and the extent to which people are being developed professionally to succeed and to being set up to succeed, and so on. I want to come back to that last point that you made, Porter, about companies and why there seems to be, use the word lazy. I would absolutely characterize there being some kind of inertia around them opening themselves up to thinking more expansively about how to attract and retain talent. So one example, the one that you provided, is only hiring people who come from peer companies that have demonstrated that they can succeed at those peer companies. Another example, of course, is only hiring people from a certain set of universities or colleges because of those degrees. There is, I think, some inertia, perhaps laziness there. there's also some status, I think, that comes along with hiring people from that set. What are some of the other things that you think are getting in the way? And for anybody who's listening to this and works at a company that appears to be stuck in the mud a little bit, what advice would you have for how they can be a catalyst for change within their companies?
So personally, what I do is I encourage people to paint the opposite picture. Imagine being the institution that welcomes people from all different backgrounds, all different experiences. You bring them in, you develop the culture where everybody feels like they can contribute, where they feel like they belong, where they feel like their experience and opinions matter. Imagine how great products would be from that organization. Imagine how consumers would love to consume from that type of company. And so I think the way to break people out of it or shake them up is to give them the opportunity to turn into something that doesn't necessarily exist at scale yet, and say, wouldn't it be amazing if that was your organization? Wouldn't you want to be the CEO of that company? And then help people get towards that direction. I think a lot of it's around storytelling, pulling from the hearts and minds of these senior leaders, because I think I do believe people have the best intention, but they get caught up in a million different things. So I think you really have to pull at the hearts and minds, and they have to have a real relationship with somebody who has the capacity to actually go do the work. And so if you're that person within the organization, ask for the ball, tell them you want to do it. And I think that people will genuinely pass you the ball and then go run with it.
Yeah, I think, I agree with what things that Porter has said. I think one of the things that, again, just addressing it at different levels of the organization, I think at the senior top management level, it's important to fully integrate diversity into the mission and values of the company. So for American Express, what we did, we said, we're in the service business. To serve someone, you've got to embrace everyone. Yeah. That's just core to our mission. And we're a global company, so we have to be welcoming and engaging and embracing to everyone. Then I think what is, again, important is there have to be goals, standards of behavior that are articulated by the leadership. But then I think, to Porter's point, what needs to happen is you need to talk about what each person's responsibility is with diversity in the company. Just as you talk about, if we're in the service business, we're all responsible to ensure we have a very satisfied customer. And I do think that anyone in a company who interacts with people can be a strong leader in diversity. Whether you have direct control or not, who do you associate with most of the time? Do you just associate with one clique in the company? Or do you seek out, to Porter's point, different types of people for you to have dialogue with, both talking about business and non-business subjects? From a hiring standpoint, are you hiring most people who look like you, who go to the same school? I mean, you see this all the time in companies, and people have to be more conscious and aware. Because the reality is, what we're saying is, when it was only one group that was in the majority, you didn't have to be aware of a lot of things. But one of the things I say to people is, the move to diversity requires a higher level of awareness and a greater level of intentionality to really bring about the change. You can't, in fact, act as you would in a non-diverse setting. It doesn't work. And so you've got to understand that there is a much more important emphasis that has to be put on self-awareness.
I think the only thing I would add to what's been said already is also the the biggest thing that is going to get in the way is changing hearts and minds. But where the conversation is today is there is an impetus for real change. And what I sometimes see get in the way of that is also big, lofty goals, where actually you're setting goals for 2025 or 2030 that will require a dramatic change in the representation of the workforce. And so on a very practical level, my advice is always start small, but start today. And so as we're working with organizations, we will often say, just start as a pilot and collect the data. Because as soon as you start seeing the true business impact of building a more diverse, equitable organization, the results speak for themselves. You see that in the form of retention when it's done right, improved productivity, and also that closing of the skills gap. But if you continue to sort of only focus on sort of the big strategies and not on the implementation and execution, no matter how small you start, we will be in the same place in 5 years' time. And so yeah, that desire to start, move quickly, and know that actually don't let perfect be the enemy of good, because we don't want to be waking up in 5 years' time and be in the exact same situation that we are in today.
Yeah, Sophie, I really like that last point. I do think that in companies where diversity seems to be flourishing and unleashing something within the company to enable it to reach a new heights of accomplishment across the board, what you find is that it develops a momentum of its own. And so then it can become self-sustaining. For companies, though, that are in an earlier stage of this process, how do we think about both providing the necessary support to folks that you've brought into the organization and making sure we set them up to succeed going forward? Because what often ends up happening, I've just heard this so many conversations with people who are brought into organizations and end up feeling a little out of place, end up feeling like they don't ever quite belong. And so even though they might occupy roles that we might regard as being admirable, there's a restlessness that they experience because they are looking for something more and they haven't truly been unleashed in this way. And so what have you found in your respective organizations? Can you at 110, Sophie at Multiverse and at Jopwell, that you think is required to help set people up to really be successful once they attain these roles?
Again, Young Mi, I think you've got to look at this at different levels. One is, I think, you've got to be, as I said before, very intentional in the career development. So if we're looking at people moving into senior management, you've got to be thoughtful about not just the types of assignments, but the people who they're going to be working for in the organization. And you got to have a conversation with the supervisor as well as the person going into the job of, we've got a real opportunity here. What's the skill set? What's the feedback? Because everybody has developmental needs. But the question is how you develop them. What are the opportunities that you're giving them? So I think the support structure is just as you would on a business issue by handing someone a business problem, you have to assess what are the challenges for this person going into the job? And what's the support that you're going to provide this person? I think mentors can play a role, but I think you got to be thoughtful up front and through the process. I think what is also important is back to the accountability. Part of the accountability is we want to develop diverse people who can move up the ranks. And what's the accountability we're going to put in there? In my view, one of the things that I thought about for us that we focused on, representation goals were important. I thought they were important for the company broadly. Individually, a point that I made is they're not going to be 100 people that will be in the running to be CEO. But at the end of the day, in the winnowing process, I want to make sure that I have representation going into that funnel and the support is there. And so I think you have some different tactics at different levels of the company. But I do think, again, I underline the level of intentionality and the awareness of the challenge of, in fact, moving diverse people through your company. You have to make that assessment and then put in the tactics that allow you to make a successful set of moves in the company.
And Ken, if I could just follow up, you gave a couple of examples of how to think about it at the leadership level of a company. When it comes to family sustaining jobs, are there some specific things that we should be thinking about with respect to a support structure? What is required, community building, mentorship?
Yeah, I think, look, what I found helpful is having affinity groups in the company. We were one of the earliest companies to adopt them, and it wasn't that what we were trying to do is have separate groups, but we also felt it was important to have a safe space. But then at the same time, the reality is, my point, when we focused very much as a company on diversity, one of the things I said in the early days, in the 80s, the problem is people of color, there's no one in power who can move us. So just don't tell me I've got to just deal here because we don't have any power. So when we get people in power, that's a different issue. So we need, again, senior leaders who, in fact, have the accountability.
Porter, you alluded to already to some of the things that you think about with respect to support. And Sophie, I know you're obsessed with this as well. So what would you guys add?
Well, I would say for smaller companies that are growing, and let's say you don't have a diversity division yet, I think some of the things that you can do, again, it goes back to institutionalizing diversity. So I think of it in two ways. One is for when you're bringing individuals into the organization, what's your interview process, and how have you institutionalized how diversity is a part of that conversation? So when people are coming through your funnel, they are hearing the language that everybody, regardless of how you identify, everybody in the company that they're interviewing with is bringing up diversity, equity, and inclusion in different contexts, and putting the onus on the person that's interviewing to really figure out how are they going to add to this culture, not fit into the culture, but how are they going to add to the culture? And are they comfortable in this language as well? That should be a part of the scorecard. How is this person going to make our company more inclusive, more equitable? And so it starts with like guarding people coming in. You got to make sure that the folks that are coming in want to be a part of this solution. Otherwise, like, we'll never get the flywheel going that we need to have. And then, as I touched on before, internally, it's asking the questions and getting compensated to Ken's point around what are the actions you're taking that lead to the cultures where people can ultimately be retained and get promoted. And so, again, what's one way you showed empathy? How did you welcome a different perspective into the conversation? What's one time that you checked in on your colleague throughout the course of the year? Tell me one time when you reached out to somebody and just asked them, how are you doing? So like, how are we humanizing these diversity related concepts that seem so unapproachable? As an individual, how are you making these topics more approachable? And that should be everybody's responsibility. So if you think about that interview process, and then once you're in, having tangible things you have to point to that led to the cultures we all collectively have said we want to build, then you get the flywheel going. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
And when I think back to our conversation at the very beginning around sort of the fetishization of college and sort of the value that is still attributed to a college degree by both employers and young people alike, I do think that one of the reasons why college is still seen as a fantastic career path, and is really because of the community that it can provide individuals as well, from student organizations to networking to finding mentors in teachers and peers. And one-on-one coaching and mentorship are some of the best ways to set individuals, young adults, up for success and really ensure that they have that sense of belonging in their place of work and career. And so one of the things that we do at Multiverse is, for our apprentices, regardless of which one of the 500 companies they're working in, we provide them access to this global peer community, where as part of that, they have access to networking, meetups, mentorship from executives from across the world, but also that chance to really build and invest in that social capital, have those affinity groups, have safe spaces to share experiences, and in doing so, build some of those durable skills that we've talked about. And what we've seen as a result of that is such an increase in sort of confidence, sense of self, sense of belonging, but also a way to start to build community outside of your place of work, which for individuals that we're working with who are often starting their professional career for the first time, actually this is a huge unlock, and it's a great way of complementing some of the initiatives that Porter and Ken talked about that businesses should be doing to make that happen.
It's interesting to hear all of you talk about, you can use different language for it, but what amounts to affinity groups. I mean, I think one of the things, Sophie, as you do point out, is that colleges or universities at the very least provide you with a set of people who have similar ambitions. And there are so many things, I don't know if they would fall under the rubric of skills per se, but they are things you need to know to be successful in a workplace. And you need to have someone that you can speak to about those things and ask about those things. How do I have a conversation with my boss? What do I do with the difficult situation in the workplace? How do I behave in a meeting? I have to make a presentation. What should my expectations be for that presentation? And on and on and on. And these are all of this sort of the in-between stuff that can make the difference between whether or not someone is able to be successful or not. And having a group of peers that you can engage in those conversations with, I think is so important. Layered on top of this conversation is, I think, corporations are also thinking about everything from work-life balance to work from home to remote work, and it almost feels like the entire space of the management of human resources has just been blown wide open. Do you see this as an additional challenge with respect to some of the issues we're talking about, or an opportunity, or both? Or how do we reconcile both of these trends happening at the same time?
I think it's both an opportunity and a challenge. I think we're seeing an absolutely incredible transformation of work globally. And I think, as I think Porter mentioned, the impact of the pandemic, certainly on low-income people, has just been just devastating. We also are dealing with the so-called Great Resignation. And I think that companies that have built strong cultures are going to have an advantage. But the issue is, how do you translate that culture in a remote environment? So I think that the 5-day work week has already changed. People are fighting as the 5-day work, it's already changed. The question is, just as we saw the convergence of the online and offline world with respect to our life, we have to now deal more proactively with the convergence of the physical world and the remote world, and how they're going to integrate, and how we can actually make both more productive if we're thoughtful about it. So I want to be clear, young man, I don't have the full answer to this, but what I do believe is we've got to use all the capabilities of technology to create a more personalized, welcoming community for our companies.
Mhm, mhm.
And it can't be remote is on this side and physical is on this side. We got to bring them together. We've got to integrate them. And I think that this is one of the transforming opportunities of our lifetime. And it's also a major challenge, but I tend to be, I try to face reality with challenges, but I tend to be an optimist that this is an opportunity to really bring people together in a more cohesive way and deal with some of the work-life balance issues that we all face. And again, it's not going to be one solution for every company and every situation, but I think any company that is not proactively grappling with the integration of the remote world with the physical world is going to have serious problems.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And Porter, so many of your comments reminded us of the importance of the human touch in our relationships in a corporate environment, the importance of empathy. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, if I reflect, well, a couple of things. One, for companies that think, oh, it's only a matter of time before we go back to what we used to do, like, you are delusional. And as I think about what excites me so much about the future workplace is that it is going to be even more mixed than what this last 2 years has been, between a virtual and an in-person way of living. And for me personally, I've seen the benefits and what it means to be able to be remote and at times go in person. So my wife gave birth to our first 2 daughters over the last 2 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And so being able to literally see my daughters every single day, one, I've become a better husband, a better dad, but in the context of work, I'm more caring, I'm more compassionate, I'm kinder, I have no edge to me anymore. And I think I show up as a better leader. If I didn't have that experience to be at home and work and check in and check out and be with my family and come back to the computer and do a life work balance over work life balance, I would not be as the leader I am today. And so I think that organizations that allow their employees to experience that as well, and really only focus on what needs to get accomplished, not how it gets accomplished, they're going to win. Those companies are going to win. As long as I'm clear with what the KPIs are and what my expectations are, it's up to the employee to figure out how to go get it done. And I'm totally comfortable with that. And I think that those are the cultures that are going to thrive in the future.
Sophie? Oh, I'm mute.
Managed to make it the whole way through. I know, I think that those are, there is so much opportunity that comes with this post-COVID world. And the big challenge for employers is ensuring that on this quest to build more representative workforce, and reach and bring in those who have been historically excluded from the workplace, that we don't end up widening that inequity gap. And so that we have the right structures through support, mentorship, coaching, but also broader enablement to ensure that those who need it, be that access to internet, access to childcare, are not left behind as a result of the world becoming more virtual and that flexibility being there. So overall, I think it provides huge hope for how we build a workforce for the future, but there are also a few big areas for us to watch out for and ensure that as we continue to put strategies in place around widening access, that we don't, as a result, leave more people behind.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Listen, we just have a couple of moments left. I'm glad that we ended on a little bit of a higher note here. I mean, we spoke at length about the challenges that we're facing and the extent to which the structural impediments to making sure people don't aren't left behind remain in place, and what it takes to to begin to break some of those impediments down. Is there any final last word you would like to leave our audience with respect to what gives you that sense of optimism that all of you referred to in your comments? Is there something that you have seen in your organizations that gives you the conviction that we are on the cusp of some really significant change in this space going forward?
Look, I think, one can't talk about the opportunities without the challenges, which we've covered. But what gives me hope is one, that I think there are a significant number of people in companies at all levels who really do want to make a difference with diversity. And I also believe that there is a level of innovation that can be brought to these challenges. And at the end of the day, for me, I believe problems are to be overcome. And I think that I'm convinced we have the capabilities and we have the people. The question is, do we have the resolve and persistence and the willingness to hold each other accountable?
Yeah, I think often to the Einstein quote that insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. And I think we are now at a point of time where both young people, those that are sort of looking to advance their careers, and CEOs and corporations are crying out for alternatives. And so what gives me hope is the fact that some of these alternatives do exist. And so it's now up to us to really deliver on that and not take our eye off the ultimate outcome, which is a much more representative corporate America that truly reflects the society that we operate in. And if we stay focused on that, then I think we have a reason to be hopeful.
Yeah, I think what excites me the most is that there's now a realization that we all have different experiences, and those experiences, we have different experiences for a lot of different reasons, and those different reasons are being accepted and not necessarily pushed back on. And because of that, I think we're at like the very, very, very early stages of seeing a highly productive workforce where people feel like, I want to work alongside my peer because they see me for the first time. And I think once that gets unlocked, I think a lot of amazing things can happen. And I just feel really excited, as I think about my colleagues within JobWell. I've gotten to know them in a way over the last 2 years that I didn't get a chance to know them previously. And I think that trust and that mentality of wanting to work hard for your peers can lead to a lot of really exciting things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is no shortage of talent out there. There's no shortage of intelligence, of people really wanting to develop. The ingredients are all right here in front of our eyes. The one missing ingredient, of course, is the resolve and the will and the operationalization of that will in the form of accountability to create real, true outcomes. So listen, thank you all. I know you're all very, very busy people, but thank you more importantly for dedicating your lives to this mission. And appreciate the conversation very much. And thanks to all of you who joined in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Youngmi, for your leadership and for a great job managing this session.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
So much. Bye, everyone.